The crowd gasped as Eliza Chen, the formidable CEO of Horizon Technologies, dropped to one knee in the middle of the charity gala. "Marcus, I don't have a husband," her voice cracked with vulnerability that shocked everyone who knew her as the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley. "And I'm tired of pretending I don't feel something when I see you with your daughter. Please, just give me one chance, one date tonight." The room fell silent as Marcus Walsh, the single father who'd been quietly volunteering at every community event for years, stood frozen, his daughter Emma clutching his hand with wide eyes. If you're enjoying this emotional journey already, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that explore the unexpected ways love finds us when we least expect it. Eliza Chen had built her empire from nothing. At 36, she commanded a tech company valued at billions, with offices spanning 3 continents and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Her sleek black hair was always perfectly styled, her designer suits impeccable, her expression unreadable during even the most hostile negotiations. The business world called her the Titanium Lady, impossible to bend, impossible to break. What no one knew was how empty her penthouse felt each night when she returned home. How the silence echoed through rooms filled with expensive furniture that had never known the sound of laughter. How she sometimes stood on her balcony overlooking the city lights, wondering if success was supposed to feel this hollow. Marcus Walsh had never planned on being a single father. At 38, his life had taken a path he couldn't have imagined when he married his college sweetheart. Emma had been just 3 when cancer took her mother, leaving Marcus to navigate the terrifying world of solo parenting while running his modest architectural design firm from a converted garage so he could be there for school pickups. 5 years had passed since then. Emma was now 8, a bright-eyed girl with her mother's curls and a resilience that humbled Marcus daily. They had their routines, Friday movie nights with homemade pizza, Saturday morning pancakes, and Sunday volunteering at whatever community event needed help. It was at these events that Marcus first noticed Eliza Chen, though he never imagined she had noticed him back. The first time had been at a beach cleanup. Eliza had appeared in designer sunglasses and clothes far too formal for picking up trash, clearly fulfilling some corporate social responsibility requirement. But then she'd rolled up her sleeves and worked harder than anyone, stopping only when she spotted a little girl struggling with a heavy piece of driftwood. "That's too big for you," Eliza had said, reaching to help. "I'm stronger than I look," Emma had replied, making Eliza laugh, a sound that seemed to surprise even herself. Marcus had watched from a distance, struck by the transformation in the woman's face when she smiled. It was like watching ice melt in the sun. Over the next year, Eliza appeared at more community events than could be explained by corporate obligation. The Children's Hospital fundraiser. The school science fair she had no connection to. The community garden planting day. Each time, she found reasons to speak with Emma, and by extension, with Marcus. Small talk became genuine conversation. Marcus found himself looking forward to these encounters, even as he told himself someone like Eliza Chen couldn't possibly be interested in a man whose idea of a wild night was staying up past 11 to finish a design project. Eliza, meanwhile, found herself scheduling her rare free time around events where she might see them. She told herself it was Emma's precocious intelligence that drew her, the girl's endless questions about how buildings were designed, how businesses worked. But in truth, it was the way Marcus listened to his daughter with complete attention, the gentle patience in his voice, the obvious love between them that made Eliza's chest ache with longing for something she'd convinced herself she didn't need. The annual charity gala for children's education wasn't the sort of event Marcus usually attended. The tickets cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. But Emma's school had been given 2 sponsored seats after winning a regional science competition, and Emma had begged to go, excited about the prospect of fancy dresses and chandeliers. Marcus had relented, dusting off his one good suit and helping Emma pick out a blue dress that made her look suddenly, heartbreakingly older. They felt out of place among the city's elite, but Emma's excitement made it worthwhile as she pointed out the crystal chandeliers and marble floors with whispered awe. Eliza had seen them the moment they entered. She'd been in the middle of a conversation with potential investors when her words had simply stopped, her attention captured by the sight of Marcus adjusting Emma's cardigan with tender care. Something inside her chest had shifted, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. After 20 minutes of distracted conversation, Eliza had excused herself from the investors. She'd walked directly to where Marcus and Emma stood by the refreshment table, Emma carefully selecting tiny sandwiches while Marcus watched with amusement. "You came," Eliza had said, her usual composure slipping. "Emma's school won tickets," Marcus had explained, suddenly self-conscious about his dated suit beside Eliza's clearly couture gown. "I'm glad," Eliza had said, her eyes never leaving his face. They'd talked for nearly an hour, Emma eventually wandering off to examine the display of science projects funded by last year's gala. Something had changed in Eliza's demeanor, a new vulnerability, a hesitancy that Marcus had never seen before. "Would you?" Eliza had started, then stopped, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been wanting to ask you something for a long time." Before she could continue, the event coordinator had appeared, insisting that Ms. Chen needed to give her speech as the evening's major donor. Eliza had been pulled away, frustration evident in the tight line of her shoulders. Her speech had started normally enough, thanking attendees for their support, highlighting the importance of educational opportunities. But halfway through, she'd faltered, her eyes finding Marcus in the crowd. "I had a whole speech prepared about investment in the future," she'd said, her voice softer than before. "About calculated risks and returns. That's what I'm good at, calculations. Strategies. But lately I've been thinking about different kinds of investments. The kind that require courage rather than capital." The room had grown quiet, sensing the deviation from the expected script. "There's someone here tonight who has taught me something important just by the way he lives his life," Eliza had continued, her knuckles white around the microphone. "He's shown me that true wealth isn't measured in acquisitions but in how fully you love. In how completely you show up for the people who matter." Marcus had felt the weight of stares as people began to look around, wondering who she meant. Emma had returned to his side, tugging his hand with curiosity. "I've built a company valued at billions," Eliza had said, her voice gaining strength. "But watching him with his daughter, I realized I've never built anything nearly as valuable as what he creates every day with a simple, 'I love you,' or 'I'm proud of you.'" And then she'd step down from the podium, walking directly toward Marcus and Emma. The crowd had parted, murmurs rising as the formidable CEO moved with purpose across the ballroom floor. That was when she'd done the unthinkable. Eliza Chen, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, had lowered herself to one knee before Marcus Walsh, who couldn't afford the suit he was wearing. "Marcus, I don't have a husband," she'd said, those words that now had the entire room holding its breath. "And I'm tired of pretending I don't feel something when I see you with your daughter. Please, just give me one chance, one date tonight." Emma's eyes had grown wide, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. Marcus had stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what was happening. "Ms. Chen," he'd finally managed, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes on them. "Eliza," she'd corrected, still on one knee. "Please call me Eliza." "Eliza," he'd repeated, the name feeling intimate on his tongue. "You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone," she'd said simply. "I've been watching you for a year, trying to find the courage to ask you out. I've rearranged my entire schedule around community events just to see you for 5 minutes. I've never done that for anyone." Emma had tugged at her father's hand. "Dad," she'd whispered loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "she's really pretty and she knows about building things. You should say yes." A ripple of laughter had broken the tension. Marcus had felt a smile tugging at his lips despite his embarrassment. "What about Emma?" he'd asked, practical even in this surreal moment. "I've already arranged for the best childcare service in the city to be on standby," Eliza had admitted. "They're vetted, insured, and can be here in 15 minutes. Or Emma can join us. Or we can do this another time." I couldn't wait any longer to ask. The vulnerability in her voice had been what finally broke through Marcus's shock. This wasn't the calculated move of a CEO. This was the raw courage of a woman laying her heart bare. Yes, he'd said simply. One date. Tonight. The room had erupted in applause as Eliza had risen to her feet, a smile transforming her face from merely beautiful to radiant. Emma had bounced on her toes, clapping her hands with delight. But, Marcus had added, Emma comes with me. We're a package deal, for tonight at least. I wouldn't have it any other way, Eliza had replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears. That night had changed everything. Eliza had taken them to a small, family-owned Italian restaurant far from the glittering gala, where the owner had greeted her by name and led them to a quiet corner table. Marcus had been surprised to discover this was where Eliza actually ate when not at business functions, not at the exclusive restaurants he'd imagined. I grew up in a place like this, she'd explained, watching Emma twirl spaghetti with concentration. My parents had a small grocery store. We lived above it. I worked the register from the time I was tall enough to reach it. But you're so. Marcus had gestured vaguely at her designer dress. Carefully constructed? Eliza had suggested with a wry smile. The business world doesn't respect people who look like they came from nothing. So I made sure I looked like I came from everything. As the evening progressed, the carefully maintained facade of Eliza Chen had continued to crack, revealing the woman beneath, a woman who worked 18-hour days not just for success but to prove something to the parents who doubted her choices, a woman who donated anonymously to educational charities because she remembered what it was like to need a scholarship, a woman who had everything and no one to share it with. Why me? Marcus had asked as Emma concentrated on her dessert. You could date successful men, men who understand your world. I've tried that, Eliza had said quietly. They wanted the CEO, the connections, the status. None of them ever looked at me the way you look at Emma, like I was the most important person in the world just for existing. The honesty had stunned him into silence. Besides, she'd added with unexpected playfulness, I've seen your designs. You're brilliant. You just chose a different definition of success than I did. Emma had looked up then. Dad's the best architect ever. He designed a treehouse for my friend Lily that has solar panels and a rainwater collection system. Did he now? Eliza had asked, her interest genuine. I'd love to see that sometime. You could come over tomorrow, Emma had suggested immediately. Dad makes pancakes on Saturdays. They're really good. Marcus had started to object to his daughter's forwardness, but Eliza had been faster. I haven't had homemade pancakes since I was your age, she'd said. I'd love that, if your dad doesn't mind. And so their first date had turned into a second, and a third, and more. Eliza had shown up for Saturday pancakes in jeans and a sweater, her hair in a simple ponytail, looking younger and more relaxed than Marcus had ever seen her. She'd helped Emma mix batter and laughed when flour dusted her nose. The transition hadn't been seamless. Eliza's work still demanded impossible hours. Marcus still struggled with letting someone new into the careful life he'd built with Emma. There had been misunderstandings and arguments, moments when their different worlds seemed impossibly far apart. The first major hurdle had come 3 months in, when Eliza had missed Emma's school play due to an emergency board meeting. Marcus had understood logically, but emotionally, he'd been transported back to all the times his late wife's illness had forced her to miss milestones. The fear of Emma experiencing more loss had made him withdraw. Eliza, unused to having her actions questioned, had initially responded with defensiveness. But later that night, she'd appeared at their door, still in her business suit, her eyes red-rimmed. I messed up, she'd said simply. I should have been there. I want to be there for the important moments. I don't always know how to balance everything yet. Her humility had disarmed him. They'd talked for hours after Emma went to bed, about expectations and fears, about the scars they both carried from different kinds of loss. "I'm trying to learn how to be part of a family," Eliza had admitted. "I've been alone so long, I've forgotten how to make room for other people's needs. And I'm afraid to trust that you'll stay," Marcus had confessed. "That when things get complicated, you won't decide we're too much trouble." They'd made no promises that night, only a commitment to keep trying, to keep talking, to be patient with each other's learning curves. The second major challenge had come from outside. The media had eventually caught wind of the relationship between the famous CEO and the unknown single father. Paparazzi had started appearing outside Emma's school, outside Marcus's small design firm. Gossip columns had speculated about Marcus's motives, suggesting he was a gold digger targeting Eliza's fortune. Eliza had been furious, ready to unleash her legal team. Marcus had been ready to end things, unwilling to subject Emma to the scrutiny. It had been Emma herself who'd found the solution. "Why don't you just tell everyone the truth?" she'd asked over dinner, with the simple logic of a child. "If they know the real story, maybe they'll leave us alone." Eliza and Marcus had exchanged looks over her head. The next day, instead of hiding from the cameras, Eliza had walked directly up to them outside her office building. "You want a story?" she'd said calmly. "Here it is. I fell in love with a man who taught me that success isn't measured by what you have but by how you love. His daughter showed me more wisdom in our first conversation than I've heard in most boardrooms. They make me better. They make me happier. That's the whole story. Now please respect our privacy." The directness had worked better than any legal threat. The media narrative had shifted overnight from scandal to romance, from suspicion to celebration of an unlikely love story. 1 year after that first gala, Marcus and Emma had moved into Eliza's penthouse. The sterile space had transformed with Emma's art on the refrigerator, Marcus's architectural models on the shelves, family movie nights in the living room that had previously been used only for business entertaining. Eliza had changed too. She'd restructured her company to allow for more delegation, coming home by 6 most evenings. She'd started attending Emma's school events, becoming known among the other parents not as the intimidating CEO but as the woman who always brought homemade cookies to bake sales because her boyfriend had taught her his mother's recipe. Marcus had found his business unexpectedly growing as well. Not through Eliza's connections, as some might have assumed, but through his own talent finally finding the right showcase. With Eliza's encouragement, he'd submitted designs to a sustainable architecture competition and won, bringing attention to his innovative approaches to environmentally responsible family homes. 2 years after that first date, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, Eliza had come home to find the penthouse transformed. A trail of rose petals had led to the balcony where Marcus and Emma had waited, both dressed up and nervous. "What's all this?" Eliza had asked, setting down her briefcase. Emma had stepped forward first, holding out a small box. "We have a question," she'd said solemnly. Inside the box had been a child's drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands, with the words, "Will you be my mom?" written in careful letters. Before Eliza could recover from the emotion of that moment, Marcus had knelt before her, much as she had done for him years earlier. "You changed our lives by being brave enough to ask for what you wanted," he'd said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Now it's my turn. Eliza Chen, will you marry me? Will you make official what we already know, that we're a family?" Eliza, who could deliver speeches to thousands without a tremor, had found herself speechless. Finally, she'd managed to nod, tears streaming down her face as she pulled both Marcus and Emma into her arms. "Yes," she'd whispered. "Yes.